This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Harvey Silverglate. He's an attorney, specifically a defense attorney, and specifically with 51 years of practice. Today we discuss, amongst many topics, 3 felonies a day, how the feds target the innocent. His book about how all of us in America, if the prosecutor wants to come after us, can probably nail us for 3 felonies every day. Yeah, let that one sink in for a second. Harvey brings a very blunt, very direct view on the law, which I welcome. His perspective is a perspective we can all learn from his close association and shared perspective on many, many levels with Alan Dershowitz, the famed Harvard law attorney, to his personal experience with the independent counsel, Robert Mueller. Harvey has been around the block. He has seen a lot. For those of you that are mystery fans, you might recognize the name Jeffrey MacDonald. Harvey was defense counsel for Jeffrey MacDonald. So fortunate to do this podcast. So fortunate to bring on people with just amazing experience and honestly, the right perspective. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Harvey Silverglate. I'm really excited to talk to you today. There is so much in the current American debate, and you're one of those guys that I think has a bright light that we can all look to that hopefully gets everybody past their tribal debates and gets us looking at perhaps the third pole, which is just the way the law should be. And I think you've got some great insights there.
I hope so. Well, maybe I don't hope so. Not necessarily good news if I'm right.
Let me throw a big one at you because, it's been all the rage and all the debate in America for, almost a year and a half. I think it's a great place to start and let you kind of, from your perspective, when you're kind of just thinking to yourself as a lawyer for many decades and lots of experience. And as you watch a political situation unfold that has legal ramifications right now with the president of the United States. Now, the typical debate on this is very political, right? You've got the left view, you've got the right view, and everyone's very tribal about where they see things. I have a sneaky suspicion, though, that when you're alone or when you're chatting with an associate of yours, perhaps like Mr. Dershowitz, you guys look at this much differently. You're looking at the law and how that's unfolding. Can you give me your perspective right now? Even pick one particular area. It's pretty broad right now. When you look at what's going on with the current situation with the president, do you have any views on this right now?
I think that the whole country seems to be in some kind of psychotic episode with respect to analysis of whether or not the president and his various minions have committed felonies. People in news media that traditionally have been somewhat sympathetic to my point of view, expressed most prominently in my book, 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. They've been very sympathetic to my point of view that a lot of innocent Americans have been harassed, prosecuted, even tried, convicted, and imprisoned by the Department of Justice, even though they have not committed what any normal human being would consider a crime, and which was not obviously criminalized by the Federal Criminal Code. They've been sympathetic to my notion of over-criminalization, over-prosecution, over-incarceration. And now that these very people who have sort of been on my side, and Dershowitz and I agree on this completely. He wrote the foreword to my book, Three Felonies A Day. We agree on these things. We have for a long, long time. Now, the media and people on the left, so-called progressives, have turned against Trump, and they now suddenly see crime everywhere. And it just shows you how few people really assess things objectively and according to principles. And instead, they analyze the law by first asking the question, is this somebody I want to get, or is this somebody I want to be on their side? And that is a hell of a way to run a legal system. And that's what's going on. I am not a Trump fan, I tell you. I did not vote for him. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton either. I thought that neither of them deserved to be in the White House. I voted Libertarian in the past election. Politically, I have no horse in that race. I do think that if the people who are the hound pack that is pursuing Trump is allowed to have its way, and if they can actually indict and convict, and Mueller can indict and convict a lot of the president's men and women, that the law will suffer. There will be a huge setback in the effort to modify the federal criminal code into a set of laws that normal people understand and that's clear and that targets real criminal conduct rather than simply conduct that people don't like.
Well, let's face it, going down the path of your work, your book, every last person that has been targeted in this probe they should be able to get multiple felonies on them, because not only could they get multiple felonies on the president and whoever he's associated with, they could get it on yours truly, me, and yours truly, you. They can get it on anybody. That's your whole point.
Yeah, well, what they've done, you see, Mueller has done a couple of things, right out of the federal prosecutor's bag of tricks. First of all, a lot of the prosecutions that he has either threatened or actually brought are for making false statements to federal investigators, FBI agents. And as I've written in my book, the false statement statute is a gigantic trap for the unwary. Because what happens is an agent comes up to you and does an interview and then writes it up in a so-called Form 302. And number one, the agent almost never records the interview. The version of the interview that is represented in the 302 report written up afterward by the agent is sort of the official version. And you can argue all you want that that's not what you said, but it's your word against two FBI agents. And those prosecutions are more often than not completely phony because they're based upon a false version of what actually occurred in the interview. That's number one. Number two, even when the person interviewed actually lies to the agent, most people don't realize that that's a federal felony. Why don't they realize it? Because they're not sworn. Normal people think that it's all right to tell a lie to a cop or an investigator as long as you're not under oath. If you're under oath, that's a different story. Then you're legally obliged to tell the truth. The federal false statement statute is a real trap because you can be charged with a 5-year felony for any misstatement made to any federal official. And I have news for you. That would include your local postmaster. You're talking about millions of people who work for the federal government. And a lie to any one of them can expose you to 5 years. And that's a lie that's not under oath. So it's a real trap for the unwary. And Mueller is an expert at exploiting this, what I call bizarre criminal code. It's not, a lot of people don't consider it bizarre because we're so used to it. Oh, so-and-so's charged with lying to an FBI agent. What's wrong with lying to an FBI agent? You're not under oath, and yet That is the way Mueller is conducting this investigation. What that tells us is he hasn't really found any real crimes, so they're making up crimes. They're getting people into the position where they're vulnerable. Now, what's the next step? Once you have been charged by Mueller with a 5-year felony of lying to an FBI agent, you are then vulnerable. And then Mueller and his people go in for the kill. Oh, they say, yes, we will prosecute you unless you cooperate with us and tell us what you know about Trump and his various minions. And if you can tell us the crimes they've committed, we will let you go. We will either give you probation or we'll even dismiss this false statement charge. And then you have the phenomenon of what my friend Alan Dershowitz calls, they get the witness not only to sing, but also to compose. What does Dershowitz mean by that? It means that the witness at that point, facing 5 years for lying to an FBI agent, will now say whatever Mueller wants them to say, because they figure that's what Mueller thinks the truth is. And that's where the composing takes place. And that's how comes so much lying and so much perjury, so much false testimony is woven into the criminal justice system by that simple set of steps that I just outlined for you. This is not a criminal justice system. This is a prosecutorial system. And it's in dire need of change. But I don't see anybody on Capitol Hill or anybody in the White House looking to actually change it.
Well, when you have all that variability and the law is subjective, it gives whoever administers it immense power. Why would they want to give that up?
Exactly. Even the party out of power figures someday they're going to get back in power and they'll be able to get even with everybody by using the FBI, Department of Justice, the federal courts in order to bring 3 felonies a day type prosecutions against their enemies. You've got this lethal weapon out there that is completely unfair and has nothing to do with the truth. It is just out there to increase the power of whoever happens to be in authority. And I should also tell you that it also gives the FBI institutionally tremendous power, because the FBI has a certain amount of power that doesn't even depend on who's in the White House or who controls Congress, because the FBI as an institution has its own power. It's been like that since J. Edgar Hoover was the director, and it hasn't changed since the death of Hoover.
I want to throw a couple examples at you from my own experience outside of something like Trump. Because look, Trump is so divisive right now. Some people won't listen at all if they hear the name Trump. Some people will go, yeah, that's great. Years ago, I had a land use case that made it to state Supreme Court. 2 things happened in that case that I recall that were really interesting. One that you just mentioned. Well, there was a situation where we needed to look at the minutes of official meetings, right? But the minutes had been edited from the original recordings, right? Even though we had the original recordings at our disposal, which bolstered my position, the court said no, because these are the official adopted minutes, which had been edited and didn't bolster my position. So it was the craziest thing. You just made that point. So even though the FBI is not recording, in my situation, we actually had the recording of the local government, but we couldn't use it because they adopted something that was completely different than what the actual meeting minutes took place. And we had the recording of it. Completely crazy.
You're talking about an example of a state court system that shares some of the problems and liabilities of the federal system. Generally speaking, you have these ridiculous situations more in federal investigations and prosecutions than state. But the states are not immune from this. And you're giving an example here of a judge who kind of formulaically, blindly followed what's considered normal procedure, even though in that particular instance, the facts argued to the contrary. It's the old joke, but it's not really a joke. Don't try to convince me with facts. My mind is made up. I've actually heard that from judges. It's crazy. Reality doesn't matter when bureaucratic efficiency is running the show. It's mind-boggling. I really say I have now been a criminal defense lawyer for 51 years. I've practiced in state courts and federal courts all over the country. And I have to say that if I was writing my memoir, which Three Felonies is not, it's sort of limited three felonies. I've talked about a few of my own cases, but not very much about my full experience. I would say that I have been practicing law in the land of Oz.
What do you mean exactly when you say that?
I mean that it's something otherworldly about it. It's a combination of Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, where reality does not follow the facts and the observable physical phenomena that you get when you open your eyes and you open your ears. Truth doesn't govern that much. And that's a real problem because facts should matter. And yet they matter much less than you would think. I greatly admire scientists because scientists proceed on evidence and they develop hypotheses that are consistent with the evidence, and they go on to reach conclusions that are replicable by others who do the same experiments. Scientists really do honor facts, but people in the law, for some reason, have veered off into a world in which facts and truth don't matter as much as they should.
Let me throw an example at you also from my world. I've got a couple different examples that are outside of your book, but they're in the same spirit of where you've gone. I think I was probably, 19 to 21. I think I was below 21. Me and some buddies, we had a keg party, right? And I believe there was probably kind of an informal collecting of cash to help defray the cost or whatever. The police showed up with an undercover agent, a sting, and it ended up myself, I think others, we were charged with selling alcohol without a license. It spent 18 months in criminal court until it eventually got I think it got dismissed. But just the whole notion, I look back at it now after going through your work and I'm thinking to myself, what in blazes were they doing? Wasting resources, wasting all that time to charge me with selling alcohol without a license. Clearly that was not my intent. And that's what I wanted to bring up with you is the word intent.
Yes, well, what they have done is they have burnished their own arrest statistics. They've made it look like they have really been working for the public good. And arrest statistics, we live by statistics. It just made them look like they were more efficient, they were doing more, they were busting more criminals. It's basically a hoax on the tax-paying public who think that they're paying their police and their courts to protect them, when in fact it's a lot of make work. You know the concept of make work? It's make work for police and judges. If judges really were doing their job, they would berate police for bringing these kinds of cases into court. But no, they treat them as if they're real cases and everybody plays the charade. And the defendant ends up having an enormous amount of expense, waste of time, and fright, because you're facing criminal charges, and it's no joke. The system doesn't punish this kind of official behavior, and it should. Frivolous prosecutors and police should be penalized for it, and instead it's business as usual, and let's get the docket cleared up, and that's what happened to you.
Let me give another example too that I've seen. This one was in the news recently. Apparently, the best college baseball player currently in America, best player, when he was 15 years of age, sexually assaulted his 4-year-old niece. He pled guilty and went through whatever juvenile process there was. it was behind the scenes, but then it came out during his college career. So he's become a pariah. And if he did this, then rightfully so, he's a pariah. But the question becomes, people say, well, gosh, he's maintained his innocence and has said, hey, this was all part of the legal system. So the question I have for you as a defense attorney is, how could somebody possibly, this kid, and we're not trying to talk about the facts of this case, we don't know. He could very well be guilty. He might not be guilty. We don't know. But how could somebody like that possibly sign a document saying, I committed this crime when I did not commit the crime? Lay that out for people, how they can understand something like that could go down.
That is a procedure that is distressingly common in the legal system, both state and federal. You would think normal people, rational people would think, hey, no legal system worth its salt should allow that to happen. However, the Supreme Court, in a decision, the Alford, A-L-F-O-R-D decision, actually approved the process by which an innocent person who maintains his innocence can enter a formal plea of guilty in order to avoid a trial and in order to avoid the harsher penalty that would come from being convicted after a trial. Because traditionally, if you plead guilty and take responsibility and save the system the enormous time and expense of a jury trial, you're rewarded with a lower sentence. And in the Alford case, the Supreme Court, to its discredit, in my view, said that it's okay if a defendant pleads guilty and a judge accepts the guilty plea, even though the defendant maintains innocence. So what you have is the legal system is kind of traps for the unwary rather than a justice system. Justice doesn't have much to do with the system that we're describing.
Do you think that, you've been at this for 50 plus years, as you mentioned, you've mentioned Alan Dershowitz, he's been at this for many decades as well. Do you think that there is an army of young attorneys that share your passion for liberty? Are they coming up through the pipeline to, at some point in time, we all leave the planet unless they get the life extension stuff figured out. But do you think that is there a new round of people that are coming along? It seems like some of the old salty guys like yourself are the ones that have got all the wisdom, and I just worry that, where's the next guys in line? Are they coming?
Well, I don't have right now too much faith in the college campuses and the people who are coming through the old meat grinder of the educational system. I think we're in an era right now where people who look at the legal system in an objective way and who worry about what we call rule of law rather than rule of the passion of the moment, I think those people are in a quite small minority. I know they exist because I'm in touch with them. They're in touch with me. They're in touch with Alan Dershowitz and people who agree with us. But you even have members of law faculties now who have joined the hunt, who have joined the mob. That is very disturbing. The colleges are in real trouble now because of the reign of the politically correct administrator. So, we're battling. I'm a co-founder and a current board member of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, headquartered in Philadelphia. We're fighting constant battles on behalf of innocent students at school who are charged with the most ridiculous offenses where the evidence is completely missing. And these students are threatened with being having a black mark on their name for life. They're threatened with being thrown out of school, even though no rational human being would possibly convict them on the basis of the evidence presented. So we have to fight for the conquest of truth and justice and fairness in an academic setting. You would think that the colleges would know better, that the colleges wouldn't be acting, like some a two-bit sheriff in River City, that they would be rational, that evidence would be important. The colleges are in trouble now, and that means the country is in trouble. And we have to hope that enough students sort of see through the fog of what college administrators have inflicted on us and on them, that they come out into the world as young citizens fighting for the conquest of truth over falsity and reality over unreality.
Harvey, I've been watching in earnest Alan Dershowitz's appearances on whether it's Fox or CNN coming on to talk about the law in the case of Trump. And one of the people, especially on CNN, that he usually is pitted against, I think is one of his former students, Jeff Toobin. So, the guys come on TV and Alan has this very just legal perspective. I feel like as a non-legal student, I feel like, my gosh, I get to learn from this guy. He's teaching me something, right? But I do feel like when I watch Toobin, I feel a little bit more of the political angle coming. Now, of course, Jeffrey Toobin is a very smart attorney. So what my question to you really is, though, is that once these guys leave the set and they get behind the scenes, is this all a game that's appearing on TV, or really a lot of the attorneys are very far away from you and Alan? They're in a different zone.
I actually have asked myself many times if Jeffrey Toobin actually believes what he says. And the reason I say that is, he was a student of Alan Dershowitz. He had you say, he's a practicing lawyer. Jeffrey Toobin has not been a practicing lawyer. He was out in the real world of law practice for a very brief time after he graduated. He then was given the perch that he has now, the media perch, CNN and the New Yorker, and he has this wonderful perch. And instead of illuminating the realities of the criminal justice system, he has kind of joined the wolf pack. His criticism of Alan Dershowitz makes me laugh, except when I realize how tragic it is that Toobin has jumped into the side of the wolf pack and is criticizing his former professor, when Toobin, in his heart of hearts, or in the deep recesses of his legal brain, has to understand that Alan Dershowitz is absolutely right, that what is being talked about, the Trump White House, about their crimes, these are not crimes. The president has the power to do what he's been doing. They're not crimes. There may be political problems. A lot of people will have political problems with what Trump is doing. They're not crimes. The solution is either impeach him, and by the way, you can be impeached, you don't have to commit a crime to be impeached. An impeachable offense is not the same as a crime.
Political process.
It's a political process, and the courts don't have any review of it. If Trump were impeached, he couldn't go to the Supreme Court to say, would you reverse the impeachment? The Supreme Court would say, that's political, not legal. We have no role in it. And that's true. Either that, or what the country could be doing, what the opposition to Trump could be doing is, God forbid, they actually get down to brass tacks and prepare for the next election and beat the guy if he runs again. That's the way the system envisions dealing with presidents who do things that a majority of the voters consider to be bizarre, bad for the country, terrible policy, but not crimes. These are not crimes. So Toobin has gotten completely caught up in what I call the wolf pack that's been pursuing Trump. And he should know better. And, Dershowitz is astonished by the vitriol that Toobin has been throwing his way, lecturing this professor who's got more experience, by the way, in the legal system in his left pinky than Toobin has had in his entire life. And he's lecturing Dershowitz. It would be laughable if it wasn't so sad and outrageous.
It isn't. It's a really strange time. As we dig into this topic, though, one thing I've kind of for 30 minutes, I haven't taken you there, though, is the title of your book, Three Felonies a Day. People might be wondering where that comes from, but we are talking about all these big players out there. We're talking about the president. We're talking about my crazy examples, a baseball player. But 3 felonies a day, that applies to you, Mr. John Q. Public out there. You are currently committing 3 felonies a day the way the system is set up. Isn't that true?
Yes. Of course, the title could have been 3 arguable felonies a day, because I don't believe they're felonies, but the law is so crazy that, especially the federal system, the law is so crazy that if a prosecutor wants to get you, if you're targeted, then they look at your daily activities and they can find felonies, federal felonies, arguable federal felonies, or even clear federal felonies that you've committed based upon a criminal justice system that criminalizes quite ordinary activity, making all of us vulnerable to federal prosecutors who are looking into our daily lives. That's the reason that Robert Mueller it's so easy for him to find targets and so easy for him to find people who would turn state's evidence and testify against the Trump administration, because, of course, everybody's committed felonies. The fault is in the legal system, not in the morality or ethics of the people being investigated.
Harvey, I'd love for you to go into another particular area, which a lot of people probably don't think about in terms of law. So, usually it's the legislators, whether it's congressmen or local town council members, state parliaments, they're making the laws, they're passing the laws. But the reality is Congress has passed the buck. Local governments have passed the buck, often to regulatory law or administrative law, where essentially perhaps somebody that just even works in the local zoning office is literally typing up a document out of thin air with no legal justification, and you, the citizen, have to abide by it. And if you don't abide by it, I know, because I've been down the path, if you don't abide by some type of administrative law that doesn't exist in the code, if you don't abide by it, your only recourse is to sue. That's the only recourse.
This is a trend that makes the 3 felonies a day argument even more dangerous, and here's why. Federal administrative agencies have tremendous enforcement powers, but they have one type of power that is even more dangerous than their vast enforcement powers, and that is they have the power to adopt and promulgate regulations under federal criminal statutes. So the federal criminal statute is very general and broad, and it assigns to some administrative agency, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, any number of federal agencies, assigns them the power to enact regulations under the broad mandate of the congressional statute. If you think that it's difficult to know the federal criminal code so that you can conform your conduct to these broad, vague admonitions and prohibitions in the federal statutes, you ain't seen nothing until you've looked at the literally hundreds of thousands of regulations, violation of each one of which is a federal felony. I can assure you there is nobody in the country who knows all of the regulations. That is to say, nobody in the country knows the full scope of what is a federal felony. In a system where the laws are so numerous and also so vague and also include in their ambit prohibitions against conduct that normal people would consider quite ordinary rather than felonious, in a system like that, the prosecutor is king, because the prosecutor can look at anybody's daily activities and see that at least 3 things he did that day happen to qualify looked at through the eyes of a prosecutor as federal felonies. That's where I got the title for my book, that the average American going about his or her daily activity commits at least 3 felonies a day and doesn't even know it. If that person comes within the sights of a federal prosecutor who wants to squeeze that person in order to say what the prosecutor wants to hear, if you come within the sights of a Robert Mueller, for example, then you're toast, because of course you've committed arguable felonies. There's none of us who can pass the test of pure cleanliness in a system where everything is a felony.
Let me ask you a question about prosecutors, and I want you to start to kind of probe your memory banks. You don't have to give me a name, but I want you to start to think about the activity of an individual that you might have come across in your 5 decades. But I want to read something really quick that was talking about you and talking about overreaching prosecutors targeting anyone, anytime. And people don't necessarily think about the motivations of prosecutors. They may just think you're guilty. They may want to, put some leverage on you to force cooperation. They may just be vengeful. I mean, people don't think about prosecutors could just be vengeful actors. They could just be building their own careers. So many motivations. Do you have anything that comes to mind in your career of witnessing a prosecutor up close and personal, your experience? Again, you don't have to name a name. If you want to, you can. But somebody that really just caused you to say, my God, how did this person ever get the power? And can you tell us, if you recall quickly, maybe what you saw them do that was just so over the top? And it would have to be somebody in your position to kind of be in the system to see how the legal sausage is made, to witness this firsthand.
Let's take the example of Robert Mueller. It's an example that we currently are following his every step. I've had experience with Robert Mueller. He happened to be the U.S. attorney and also a line prosecutor here in Boston. At some point in his career, I actually had experiences with him. When he went to Washington, he was head of the criminal division. I actually had a meeting with him in Washington at my request. Alan Dershowitz and I, and 2 other lawyers representing Dr. Jeffrey McDonald, who was convicted.
I remember the case. Yep, famous case.
The so-called Fatal Vision murder case. We had accumulated, we represented McDonald for a number of years, and we had accumulated a tremendous amount of evidence that he was wrongly convicted, that the evidence presented at his trial was concocted by a combination of federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and Army military criminal investigation thugs. We asked for a meeting with Mueller, and he knew us. He said, sure, come on down. So we flew down to Washington, walked into the main justice building, and we walk into the meeting room, and they were sitting around the table are FBI agents. Mueller had not yet arrived, so Dershowitz and I and the 2 other lawyers on our team sat down, waited for Mueller to show up. Mueller walks in the room. He walks up to the head of the table. He stands up. He looks at everybody, and he says, welcome, gentlemen. I just want to start this meeting by saying that criticism of the Bureau is a non-starter. In other words, if what you're here to tell me is FBI agents did something wrong, forget about it. And of course, our whole argument for McDonald's innocence was that the evidence was concocted by FBI agents. We had flown down for nothing. He was not going to pay any attention because he was a true believer in the Bureau. He believed that the Bureau was a pristine, brilliant investigative agency. He was not going to entertain any criticism of the Bureau, any argument that they had framed an innocent man. The meeting was a ridiculous waste of time and money. That's the mentality. And I can tell you that different prosecutors have different motivations for this kind of conduct, that they're perfectly comfortable prosecuting people who have not committed crimes. Some of them do it. Mueller, he's a true believer. Others prosecutors who were there for only a few years, who were looking to get notches on their hunting belt so that when they are done with government services, they call it, they are hired by these white shoe law firms, Wall Street type law firms, which they're starting out with several $100,000 a year starting salary. And on their curriculum vitae on the firm's website is, he had 7 years experience as a career, as a white collar prosecutor, and now he's fully capable of doing white collar defense. You should hire our law firm. And these people have built careers on the graves of people whose lives, who they've buried through unjust prosecutions. The system that's a corrupt system that I just described. And yet that's how business is done in big law.
It's frightening. I've had so many smaller experiences in my life that truly changed me, because the moment one sees personally the law being used against you for political reasons, when you taste that and you feel that, it literally changes your DNA in an instant.
Well, there's nothing like being victimized by the system to radicalize you. A lot of the clients I've represented, a lot of the people whom I interviewed for my book, 3 Felonies a Day, they have been radicalized against the system because they've seen very close, uncomfortably close. They have been victimized. Many of them have spent time in prison, even though they have not committed what any normal human being would consider a crime. They have turned against the system, but there are not enough of them. And my hope is that people will wake up and realize that the Muellers of the world, you can't just accord them belief because they've been Boy Scouts all their lives.
You're doing the fine work, in my humble opinion, and I feel honored to get a chance to just share some time with you and learn some. So I really appreciate you coming on, Harvey. And in the future, if you want to even have a longer conversation, I'd love to take you down the path, because I know you've got so many interesting experiences. And I really do think you're right that if we don't talk about this subject, if we don't embrace it, if we don't try to get past this tribal political nonsense, I mean, it's really about, when I hear you talk, when I hear Alan Dershowitz talk, I don't know how sane people, whether they're on the right or the left, if they hear you talk, if they hear Alan talk, that's what I think Americans used to say, those are the guys I want to learn from. That's what I want to know. I don't want to be all in this other kind of like crazy state that we're in, this psychotic state, as you say.
We are in a time of troubles right now, and it is the obligation of every citizen to try to rise above it and to continue to speak, as the saying goes, truth to power. And if 95% of the law professors in the country have caught this disease, we have to be able to say, yep, 95% are crazy and only 5% are sane in this particular era. It's not a question of how many law professors think the president is guilty of felonies. It's a question of whether they're thinking straight or whether they're just caught up in a political wolf pack. And as again, I say, I don't like the president. I don't like what he's doing. This has nothing to do with my analysis as to whether he's committed crimes or not.
Harvey, I appreciate you coming on. Really great stuff. 3 Felonies a Day. Everybody should check it out. Anything they can find on you. If you're interested in the law, I mean, it's a great path to go down. You've really got fantastic insights. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time today to educate my audience.
I appreciate your interest and your audience's attention to what I've had to say.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, Trend Following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government, and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.